I'm here today to talk about Dante Gabriel Rossetti, the British Victorian painter and member of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. Rossetti is most famous today, I think, for his oil paintings from the early 1860s till 1882 when he died. And these oil paintings feature beautiful women that are very statuesque. They have lots of lovely flowing hair and very prominent features that center about a bee-stung mouth. I think, however, despite the very striking nature of these oil paintings, I think that his true genius lies actually in his earlier work in watercolors from 1850s and the early 1860s. Here's an example of one of these entitled Beatrice Meeting Dante at a Marriage Feast Denies Him Her Salutation. It is an illustration of the story from the Vita Nuova by Dante Alighieri, the 14th century Italian poet most famous for writing the Divine Comedy. In this scene, Dante, let's get a little closer up, is on the right, and he gazes with extreme fascination towards the figure of Beatrice in the center. Throughout the Vita Nuova and the Divine Comedy, Dante expresses his passionate love for Beatrice, even though he only met her 2 times. And his love is courtly love. And courtly love is the love that a man has for a woman that is completely spiritual and not physical. And this courtly love idea was very popular with the Victorians. In this, as Dante gazes towards Beatrice really doesn't seem to pay any attention to him at all, but looks past him kind of imperiously with her nose in the air. And Dante is so intent on her, he doesn't even see this pretty little girl who I think is trying to cheer him up by handing him a little bouquet of flowers. But Dante only has eyes for his love. I think what you notice first about these watercolors is their bright, jewel-like hue. And the brightness comes from the fact that the watercolors are painted on white paper. Oil paintings from this time, and Rossetti's later oil paintings, are usually done on top of a warm gold or warm red color. However, in the watercolors, he painted directly onto the white ground paper, and then the colors really shine as though lit from underneath. In his watercolors, which have a soft, kind of pebbly, hazy quality, Rossetti uses color to express a lot of the feeling. We see Dante is wearing a vivid red hue, and even though his love for Beatrice is only spiritual, it was still very intense. And I think this intensity is hinted at by the red color, while Beatrice, aloof and separate, is wearing cool emerald green with blue sapphire sleeves. And this expresses the coolness and the imperious quality that she has. They're very long and slender figures, and they're not terribly three-dimensional. The figure of Beatrice was inspired by a woman named Elizabeth Siddal. Elizabeth Siddal came into the Pre-Raphaelite and other Victorian painters' circle because she was working at a hat shop where a young man named Walter Deverell, who was a painter, Walter Deverell was shopping there with his mother when he encountered Elizabeth Siddal, who was working there. And when Deverell saw her extreme beauty, with these masses of coppery golden hair, pale skin, a long, slender neck, heavy-lidded eyes, and high cheekbones, he asked her to model for him, and soon she was modeling for many of the Victorian painters. She's probably most famous for modeling for the figure of Hamlet's Ophelia in this well-known painting by Sir John Everett Millais. When she modeled for him, he insisted that she float in a bathtub of water so that he could see the effects of water on her clothing and on her hair and on the bedraggled flowers that surround Ophelia here in the moment just before her death. And to get this effect, he kept the water warm with candles and lamps so that she could float in the bathtub for a long time. However, in the intensity and concentration of his painting, he forgot to notice that all these candles and lamps had burned out, and she did not interrupt him. And she became very chilled and ultimately got very sick from doing this. But still, she will always be known for this beautiful figure of Ophelia floating in the waters. So Rossetti became personally involved with Elizabeth Siddal. She moved into his studio with him, and he only would allow her to model for him. And for the next several years, she was Beatrice and other romantic heroines in many of his paintings, including this one where you see her with Dante. And here she is Leah in Dante's vision of Rachel and Leah. And here she is actually Princess Sabra in the medieval story of St. George and Princess Sabra. In Paolo and Francesca, we see her as the lovely Francesca. And Paolo and Francesca were lovers that were discovered by Virgil and Dante. Virgil on the left, Dante on the right center, see Paolo and Francesca as, sadly, they float for eternity in the rain fires of hell. The reason they're floating for eternity through hell in the story from the Divine Comedy is because they were in love with each other with an intense love of many, many years, but tragically they weren't married. Francesca was actually married to someone else. And after this long-term passion, they are discovered in bed by her husband and they are murdered. And that is why they must float forever through hell for committing the sin of unmarried love. And so here we see on the left they share their first kiss. And it's intense and fervent with their eyes closed tightly. But I think the real passion you see in their hands and the way their fingers are so tightly clasped about each other as the book that they were looking at almost falls to the floor. In the center, Virgil on the left, Dante on the right, gaze with real compassion at these two floating forever through hell's fires. Virgil is Dante's companion in the Divine Comedy as they explore hell and purgatory. And on the right again we see them, this time no longer so three-dimensional as they were in the first part, but rather flattened out, slender, gaunt-looking, with hollows under their chins, under their eyes, under their cheekbones, and just floating forever through damnation. Sadly, the relationship between Rossetti and Elizabeth Siddal waxed and waned through the 1850s. He did not always treat her very well. She became very ill. She left him several times and came back to him. Finally, in around 1860, he was sure she was going to die, so he married her. And she rallied briefly. She had a stillborn child in 1861, but died in 1862 of an overdose of laudanum, which is a opium drug. Here, Rossetti paints her one last time as Beatrice. When in the story from the Divine Comedy, Beatrice dies, and she is here depicted in a trance as she travels metaphorically from earth to heaven. And so one last time he paints Elizabeth Siddal as Beatrice with a glow of golden color. It's the soft colors of the watercolor, but really it's actually an oil painting. And I think it serves as kind of a transition between those ethereal watercolors of the 1850s and the more substantial looking oil paintings of the mid-1860s to the 1882. And here Elizabeth Siddal, in the form of Beatrice, is visited by a dove who carries a poppy. Poppies represent death and sleep, and in this case we think it's probably a hint of the poppy that made the opium that was in the laudanum that finally caused the death of Elizabeth Siddal in 1862.